The champagne, metaphorically speaking, was already open. Not actual champagne, of course. The Vorath Dominion did not drink fermented grape juice. They drank something called Velhari nectar, which smelled like burning rubber and tasted, according to one unfortunate human diplomat who had once been offered a glass, like someone set fire to a dentist's office. But the spirit of celebration? Oh, that was very much present, very much alive, very much filling every corridor of the grand deliberation spire on the planet Sorath Prime, where the 12 ruling species of the Galactic Convergence Council had gathered to watch humanity's final hour play out on a screen the size of a football stadium. My name is Kale Duvari, Senior Observer, 3rd rank, assigned to the Human Monitoring Division of the Convergence Intelligence Bureau. And I want to be absolutely clear about something before I tell you what happened that day. I did not celebrate, not because I was particularly fond of humans. No, I had spent 4 standard years watching them, cataloging them, writing reports about them, and I had developed what my supervisor called an unhealthy obsession with their inexplicable behavior patterns. What I had actually developed was something far more dangerous to my career. A profound, bone-deep, sleep-disrupting sense of unease about what humanity was truly capable of. Nobody listened to me. They never do they? The year, in human terms, was 2387. In Vorath terms, it was the 14th cycle of the Sorath Reclamation, which sounds much more dramatic and is, honestly, completely meaningless to anyone who wasn't born on Sorath Prime. The important thing is this: humanity had been at war with the Convergence Council for 11 years, not a Cold War. Not a diplomatic disagreement, a real screaming, ship-splitting, planet-burning war that had consumed 4 of humanity's 7 colony worlds and reduced the once thriving human population from approximately 40 billion souls to something closer to 9 billion. 9 billion survivors, scattered across 3 remaining worlds, with a combined fleet that the Convergence Intelligence Bureau had estimated at roughly 400 warships. 400. The Convergence Council commanded 47,000. The math, as Counselor Vorix Tanu of the Dreven Collective liked to say, was not complicated. Vorix Tanu was the loudest voice in the Grand Deliberation Chamber that day. He was also, in my professional opinion, the most aggressively overconfident creature in the known galaxy, and I include in that assessment the entire population of the Gelth, who once declared war on a star because it was positioned disrespectfully. The siege is complete, Vorix announced, spreading his forearms wide, his orange ceremonial robes catching the light from the massive display screen behind him. Earth itself is surrounded. 60,000 ships, brothers and sisters of the Convergence. 60,000 ships encircling the birth world of humanity. There is no escape. There is no reinforcement. There is only the question of whether the humans will kneel before the final bombardment, or simply cease to exist without the dignity of a formal surrender. Applause. Genuine, thunderous, multi-species applause that made the floor vibrate. I sat in the observation gallery 17 rows back, between my colleague Privasane and a Dreven junior analyst whose name I had already forgotten, and I stared at the display screen, and I felt the particular flavor of dread that only comes when you know something is wrong but you cannot prove it. You look terrible, Pravor said helpfully. Thank you, Priva. Are you going to be sick? Possibly. Is this about your humans again? They are not my humans. You have 47 reports filed about their unpredictable tactical behavior. That is literally my job. You named one of your reports Why We Should All Be Worried, a comprehensive study that nobody is reading. The title was very clear about the content. Priva made the sound that passed for a sigh among Vorath, which resembles a small engine failing. Kale, it is over. 400 ships against 60,000. The blockade has been in place for 6 months. Earth's supply lines are cut. Their manufacturing capacity is, according to your own division's most recent assessment, at 12% of pre-war levels. The only thing happening today is the ending. I looked at the screen. I looked at the 60,000 Convergence warships arranged in a perfectly symmetrical blockade pattern around the blue-green sphere of Earth, glittering like a net made of stars. I looked at the silence where humanity's fleet should have been, and was not. Where are their ships? I said quietly. Destroyed, Pravor said. Scattered, hiding in the outer colonies. We have been over this. The Intelligence Bureau's last confirmed count was 400 ships, I said. 400 ships, spread across 3 colony worlds. Earth itself had approximately 40 warships in its defensive orbit when the blockade began 6 months ago. I paused. We have not seen those 40 ships in 3 months. They were destroyed in the skirmish near Luna Station. 14 were destroyed near Luna Station, I said. I read the battle report, Priva. 14 confirmed kills. The other 26 disengaged and retreated. We tracked them to the dark side of Jupiter. Another pause. And then we lost them. Priva blinked all 3 of her eyes at me. Lost them. Lost them. No signal. No thermal signature. No gravity displacement readings. 26 human warships. Last seen heading toward Jupiter, and then, I spread my hands. Gone. Kale. Priva's voice had taken on the gentle, careful tone that people use with colleagues they have started to genuinely worry about. Ships do not disappear, human ships do, I said. It is in my report. Report number 31. Anomalous disappearances of human vessels, 17 documented cases, and the disturbing pattern I cannot stop thinking about. I sent it to you. I did not read it. Nobody read it. Down on the council floor, Vorex Tanu had moved on to the formal celebration phase of the proceedings. A junior aide was distributing glasses of Velhari nectar. Someone had activated a secondary screen showing a live feed of Earth, close enough to see the cities on the night side, glowing with light. 40 billion humans had once lived on that planet. Now it held perhaps 2 billion. The rest were on the colony worlds, on stations, in ships, or dead. 2 billion humans on a blockaded planet, watching 60,000 warships form a perfect sphere around their world. And somewhere, everywhere and nowhere, 26 ships that we had lost in the shadow of Jupiter 3 months ago. I pulled out my data tablet and opened the file I had been working on for the past 8 weeks. The file I had submitted to my supervisor, who had returned it with the comment, "Kale, you are catastrophizing. Please take a rest cycle and then resume normal duties." The file was titled simply, "What if they are not hiding? Let me tell you what I knew about humans," in the way that only someone who has spent 4 years watching them can know things. I knew that humans were, biologically speaking, absurd. They were soft. They had no natural armor, no venom, no impressive claws. Their visual range was laughably narrow. Their hearing was mediocre. Their sense of smell was so poor that other species used it as a punchline. They got cold easily. They got hot easily. They needed to sleep for roughly 1/3 of every rotation cycle, which is frankly embarrassing. They required a very specific combination of atmospheric gases to survive. They were, in the most charitable assessment possible, fragile. I also knew that humans had, in the past 11 years of warfare, destroyed more convergence warships per engagement than any other species in recorded history. Not because they were stronger, not because their technology was superior. The Vorath had faster drives. The Drevens had better weapons. The Gelth had shield technology that could absorb impacts that would vaporize a human cruiser. But humans did something that none of our species did instinctively. They learned. Not just tactically. Not just strategically. They learned in the middle of a battle. A human fleet commander, facing a situation their doctrine had not prepared them for, would not retreat to consult the tactical manual. They would improvise. They would adapt. They would do something that their enemy had never seen before, and would therefore not have a counter for. And the next time that enemy tried the same attack, the humans would have a counter for it. I had documented this behavior 47 times. 47 separate engagements where human forces had performed actions that our tactical models had rated as having less than 8% probability of success, and had succeeded. The Convergence Council's response to this had been essentially, yes, but they are still losing, and they were right. Humanity was still losing. 4 colony worlds gone, 31 billion dead, the surviving fleet outnumbered by more than 100 to 1. But here is the thing that kept me awake through my rest cycles, that made Priva look at me with that gentle, worried expression, that had generated 47 reports that nobody read. The humans knew they were losing. They had known for years, and yet they had never, not once, in 11 years of warfare, done the thing that every other species eventually does when faced with overwhelming odds. They had never broken. No mass surrender. No fractured command structure. No defections. No collapse of civilian morale. No desperate secret negotiations. The Convergence Intelligence Bureau had tried everything. We had offered generous peace terms after year 3. We had offered to spare the colony worlds if Earth surrendered. We had even, in a moment of tactical creativity that I found personally embarrassing, attempted to bribe several human admirals. The admiral who received that particular offer had replied, through the official diplomatic channel, with a message that contained only 2 words. The second word was off. The first word was not translatable into formal Vorath, but the Bureau's Human Language Division had provided a very thorough annotation. So, 31 billion dead, 4 colony worlds taken, 9 billion survivors, 400 ships, a complete blockade, and 26 ships that had vanished near Jupiter 3 months ago. Priva, I said. No, she said. I haven't said anything yet. You are going to say something that will ruin this celebration for both of us, and I would like to request, as your colleague and as someone who has endured 4 years of your reports, that you simply do not say it. I looked at the screen. Earth, turning slowly. The Convergence fleet, perfect and enormous and absolute. Where, I said quietly, are humanity's engineers? Priva turned to look at me. The Intelligence Bureau's count of human military engineers pre-war was approximately 3 million. I continued. These are the people who design and build their ships. Before the war, they were based primarily on Earth, on Mars, and on the Callisto manufacturing platforms. I set my tablet down. Earth accounts for most of their current population. Mars was evacuated 18 months ago, but Callisto was destroyed in the Year 4 offensive, Priva said. We hit the manufacturing platforms directly. We hit 3 of the manufacturing platforms directly, I said. The Bureau's strike assessment confirmed 3 destroyed, 2 damaged. There were 7 platforms total, a very long silence. The other 2, Priva said slowly, were not in the strike assessment, I said, because they were not there. They had been moved. Another silence, longer this time. Where were they moved to? Priva asked, very carefully. That, I said, is the question I have been trying to answer for 8 weeks. And the answer, Priva, the answer that I wrote in a report that nobody read, is that I do not know. I do not know where 2 fully functional human deep space manufacturing platforms went, along with the 200,000 engineers and construction workers who were stationed on them. Down on the council floor, Vorex Tanu raised his glass of Velhari nectar. The celebration had reached the toast phase. Other councillors were rising, lifting their own glasses, their faces bright with triumph. To the end of the human problem, Vorex announced. The chamber cheered. I stared at the display screen. I stared at the silence between Jupiter and the dark edge of the solar system. I stared at the 60,000 ships and the perfect blockade and the beautiful, terrible assumption that everyone in this room had made without ever questioning it. The assumption that humanity had spent the last 3 years desperately trying to survive. What? Priva said, very quietly, beside me. If they were not trying to survive. I turned to look at her. Her 3 eyes were fixed on the screen. Her gray skin had gone slightly pale. She had heard it finally. She had heard the thing I had been trying to say in 47 reports and a dozen conversations. What if they were not trying to survive, she repeated, like someone reciting a sentence in a dream. What if they were buying time? The chamber cheered again. Vorex Tanu began to speak about legacy, about the rightful order of galactic civilization, about the lesson that humanity's fall would teach to any other species foolish enough to resist the Convergence Council's authority. My data tablet buzzed. I looked down at it. It was a priority alert from the Bureau's Deep Space Monitoring Network, the kind of alert that was supposed to go directly to the High Commander's desk, the kind of alert that had apparently been misrouted to my observer's station because someone in the Network Administration Division had not updated the distribution list after last cycle's reorganization. The alert was tagged, anomalous gravity displacement, multiple contacts, outer solar system, classification, unidentified, followed by a number. I read the number 3 times. Then I read it a 4th time. Because the human concept of checking your work is apparently contagious after 4 years of study. The number did not change. I stood up. Priva, I said. My voice came out very strange, very flat. The voice of someone who has spent 8 weeks being right about something and has just received confirmation so overwhelming that being right has stopped feeling like a victory. Priva, I said again, I need you to look at this alert. She looked at it. She read it once, then twice, then she looked at me with all 3 eyes very wide. And she said something that I had never heard her say in 4 years of working together. She said, "Oh no." On the display screen, Earth turned slowly in its blockade, patient and blue and quiet. And somewhere in the dark beyond the edge of what the Council's sensors had been watching, something was moving. A lot of somethings. The alert should have reached the High Commander's desk 19 minutes before it reached mine. 19 minutes during which Vorex Tanu could have been informed, during which the fleet commanders could have been contacted, during which 60,000 warships could have begun repositioning. 19 minutes. The Convergence Council celebrated Earth's fall for 19 beautiful, catastrophic minutes. And then the display screen flickered. Not a malfunction, not a technical error. The screen flickered because something very large had just crossed the threshold of the solar system's outer boundary, close enough that the network's passive sensors had finally caught it, and the feed had automatically updated to include this new information. The chamber went quiet. Vorex Tanu lowered his glass. The new contacts on the display screen were not 40 warships, they were not 400 warships. The number on the screen, rendered in calm blue digits by a sensor network that had absolutely no emotional investment in the situation, read, nearly 5,000 human warships, emerging from the dark, heading inward, heading for Earth. I sat back down very slowly. I picked up my data tablet. I opened my report, the one nobody had read, the one titled "What If They Are Not Hiding?" I scrolled to the section I had written at 3 in the morning after my 14th consecutive sleepless rest cycle, the section my supervisor had called fanciful speculation, and frankly alarming, and I read the sentence I had written there. The humans have not been retreating. They have been building. The chamber was still silent. Someone dropped a glass of Velhari nectar. It shattered on the floor. Nobody moved to clean it up. On the display screen, the 4,847 contacts were resolving into clearer shapes now, as the sensor network processed more data. Ships, human ships, but not the models the Bureau recognized. Not the old cruisers, not the familiar destroyer classes, not the carriers that we had been cataloging and tracking and in 4 cases losing near Jupiter. These were new. Completely new. Someone in the chamber made a sound like a very small animal encountering something very large. It was not a dignified sound. It was, however, extremely understandable. Privi turned to me. "Your report," she said. "Report number 38, the one titled Estimated Output of 2 Missing Callisto Manufacturing Platforms Operating at Full Capacity for 36 Months. "Yes," I said. "The number you calculated," she said carefully. "The estimated ship count." "Yes," I said again. "You wrote 4,600 to 5,200, she said. I looked at the screen. "Yes," I said. "I did." Vorex Tanu was not a small creature. He stood nearly 2.5 meters tall, with 4 arms, a chest broad enough to park a small shuttle on, and the kind of physical presence that made junior staff members instinctively step aside in corridors. He had ruled the Dreven Collective for 30 years. He had commanded armies. He had signed death warrants for entire populations without his hand trembling even slightly. And right now he was sprinting toward the emergency exit of the Grand Deliberation Chamber like someone had told him the building was on fire. His ceremonial robes tangled around his legs, his Velhari nectar still dripping from the hand he had forgotten to put down. Nobody stopped him, partly because nobody in the chamber had yet recovered the motor function required to stop anything, partly because watching the display screen, stopping Vorex Tanu, had become an extremely low priority. The 4,847 contacts had now fully resolved. The sensor network, bless its completely emotionless algorithmic heart, had helpfully added a classification tag beneath the contact count. The tag read, Warship Class Unknown, Drive Signature Human Origin, Weapon Systems Scanning, Estimated Arrival at Blockade Perimeter 4 hours, 17 minutes. 4 hours and 17 minutes. Priva made a sound beside me. Not words, just a sound. The sound of someone who has just watched a very large number appear on a screen and has not yet found the specific arrangement of syllables that adequately responds to it. I understood completely. I had spent 8 weeks preparing for this moment, intellectually speaking. I had run the numbers. I had read every human tactical document the Bureau had managed to recover. I had written 47 reports, filed 47 times, read by essentially nobody, about exactly this scenario, and I was still sitting very still, staring at the screen, with the particular feeling of someone who has correctly predicted a tidal wave and is now discovering that correctly predicting a tidal wave does not actually make you any less wet. The chamber found its voice approximately 4 minutes after losing it. The voice it found was not calm. Fleet Commander Dara Sovex of the Vorath Naval Division reached the communication terminal first, which I respected because Dara Sovex was at least 50 years old and had eaten something that disagreed with her at the pre-celebration dinner. She punched in the emergency channel code with both hands moving simultaneously, her gray-blue face locked into an expression of absolute professional composure that only someone who has trained for crisis response their entire adult life could maintain while the rest of the room was quietly fragmenting around her. "This is Fleet Commander Sovex to High Admiral Brenix," she said crisply. "Priority 1 transmission. We have a developing situation at the outer solar system perimeter. I am transmitting the sensor data now. I need immediate confirmation of fleet readiness status, and..." She stopped. She listened. Her composure did not crack. It was more like watching a very solid wall develop a hairline fracture, barely visible. "But there, High Admiral," she said very carefully. "When you say the blockade fleet has already received the contact alert, what do you mean by already received?" Another pause. "How long ago?" The hairline fracture widened very slightly. "I see," she said. "And the repositioning orders." She listened. She closed her eyes. "Thank you, Admiral Brenix," she said, and stepped away from the terminal with the careful measured movements of someone who has decided that professionalism is the only thing standing between them and screaming. "Commander Sovex," said Councillor Mevan Rath of the Thari Assembly, who had been edging toward the terminal and was now close enough to grab it if necessary. "What is the fleet's status?" Dara Sovex turned to face the room. Every eye, every sensor organ, every bioluminescent attention receptor in the chamber was focused on her. "The High Admiral," she said, "received the contact alert 11 minutes ago, and he has been attempting to issue repositioning orders since that time." She paused. The issue is that 60,000 ships in a perfectly symmetrical blockade formation are somewhat difficult to reposition quickly. Another pause, particularly when the direction of the incoming threat requires a significant portion of the interfacing elements to move outward through the formation. Counselor Mevan Rath blinked. They are blocking themselves. They are. Dara Sovex chose her next word with great care. Experiencing some organizational complexity, yes. The room was silent for a moment. Then Counselor Fal Durez of the Tethian sovereignty, who was very old and had seen a great many things in his centuries of service, made a sound that was unmistakably a laugh. He caught himself immediately, covered it with a cough, and resumed his expression of appropriate gravity. But the laugh had been heard. I felt a very inappropriate smile threatening to cross my own face. Because here is the thing about a perfectly symmetrical blockade formation. It is extraordinarily effective at keeping things in. It is extraordinarily effective at keeping things out. If those things are coming from a known direction that you have time to orient toward. It is extraordinarily ineffective when approximately 5,000 warships are coming from an unexpected direction because the ships on the far side of the formation are now on the wrong side, and the ships on the near side cannot move outward without disrupting the ships behind them, and the entire magnificent precision of the formation becomes essentially a geometric problem that nobody wants to be solving while an enemy fleet is bearing down on them at combat velocity. I had written a report about this. Report number 29. The Tactical Vulnerabilities of Fixed Blockade Formations. A study in the difference between containment and defense. My supervisor had returned it with the note, Kale. The formation is standard doctrine for a reason. Standard doctrine. The next 4 hours were, professionally speaking, the most extraordinary of my career. Personally speaking, they were the most terrifying. Emotionally speaking, they occupied a space so far outside my previous experience that I had simply stopped trying to categorize them and was instead just watching and breathing and occasionally reminding myself to do both of those things in the correct order. The council chamber had transformed from a celebration venue into a crisis coordination center in approximately the time it took to spill 3 more glasses of Velhari nectar and locate the secondary communication arrays behind the decorative panels on the eastern wall. Screens that had been showing artistic representations of humanity's conquered colony worlds were now showing tactical displays. The mood, which had been champagne adjacent, was now something closer to the feeling you get when you step onto ice that you were not certain was going to hold your weight and hear it creak. On the main screen, the human fleet continued its approach. They were not rushing. That was the first thing that struck every analyst in the room, mine included. 5,000 warships traveling toward 60,000 should, logically, be traveling as fast as their drives could manage. Speed equals surprise, and surprise is one of the few advantages the outnumbered have. The human fleet was not rushing. They were moving at a pace that the Bureau's tactical systems calculated as leisurely, purposeful. Like someone walking toward a destination they have thought about for a very long time and are now confident of reaching. They are showing off, said analyst Brem Tavar from the Bureau's tactical division, who had arrived in the chamber 20 minutes into the crisis and had immediately commandeered a screen for his own use. He was young, even by Vorath standards, and he had one of those minds that processes fear by turning it immediately into data. Look at the formation geometry. They are not in an attack formation. They are in a presentation formation. They want us to see them clearly. Why would they want us to see them clearly? Asked one of the junior Dreven counselors. Brem Tavar looked at the screen. Because, he said, they know we are watching. He pulled up the formation geometry on his screen, rotating it, studying it. Then he made a sound. They know about the blockade formation problem, he said. Everyone looked at him. The approach vector, he said, pointing. They are coming from the precise direction that forces our maximum repositioning complexity. Not almost the precise direction, the exact direction. Someone calculated this. Someone ran our doctrine against their approach geometry and found the optimal angle of attack to cause the most disruption. He paused. That is not an accident. I thought about the 26 ships that had vanished near Jupiter 3 months ago. I thought about what 26 ships could do, sitting silent and dark in the outer system, watching, recording, sending data home on tight beam frequencies so narrow that our detection arrays had never caught them. I said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the screen was not already saying more eloquently. They have been watching us, Priva said quietly from beside me, all this time, while we were watching them. Yes, I said. They let us think we were watching them. Yes, she was quiet for a moment. They are very frightening. I know, I said. I have 47 reports about it. The first engagement began at hour 3 and 42 minutes. Not the main engagement. The main engagement was still 35 minutes away. What happened at hour 3 and 42 minutes was something that sent every tactical analyst in the chamber into absolute stunned silence. and made Tavar sit down very heavily and stare at his screen with the expression of someone who has just seen the solution to a problem they thought was unsolvable, and realized too late that the solution was not theirs. The human fleet stopped, all 4,847 ships, full stop, at a distance still outside comfortable weapons range for both sides, and then a single ship broke from the formation, one ship. Not a warship, or at least not one our databases recognized as such. It was large, yes, larger than anything we had in the corresponding class range, but it was moving alone toward the blockade, at a speed that was almost conversational. "What is it doing?" someone asked. Nobody had an answer. The single ship continued inward, past the outer edge of the blockade formation, threading between two convergence frigates that pivoted uncertainly, their weapon systems active but not yet firing, because no one had issued a fire order, because no one quite understood what they were looking at. The ship stopped in the approximate center of the blockade formation, then it broadcast. Not on a military frequency, not on a tactical channel, on the open civilian emergency broadcast frequency that every ship and station in the known galaxy monitors, the one that is used for distress calls and evacuation notices, and the occasional lost navigation buoy. The message was in Vorath Standard, which told me that someone had very carefully prepared this transmission, and had chosen the language of the Convergence Council's founding species deliberately. The voice was human, female, very calm, the kind of calm that is not the absence of emotion but the absolute mastery of it, the calm of someone who has decided far in advance exactly what they are going to say, and exactly how they are going to say it. This is Admiral Senavarus of the Terran Reclamation Fleet, broadcasting to the Galactic Convergence Council and to all vessels currently participating in the blockade of Earth. I am transmitting this message on open emergency frequency, so that there is no ambiguity about what is being offered, and no possibility of misrepresentation afterward. A brief pause, the kind of pause that is not uncertainty, the kind that is structure. The Terran Reclamation Fleet currently fields 4,847 active warships. These vessels represent approximately 91% of the fleet constructed over the past 36 months at undisclosed facilities in deep system space. The remaining 9% are already positioned. The chamber went very, very still. "Positioned where?" someone said. Barely a whisper. The Admiral's message continued as if she had heard. "You will have noticed that our approach vector has created certain organizational difficulties for your blockade formation. This was intentional. What you may not yet have noticed is that your resupply and communication relay stations in grid sectors 7 through 14 have been offline for approximately the past 2 hours." Another pause. This was also intentional. Tavar was already pulling up the relay station status on his screen. His face did something complicated. "The remaining 9%, he said quietly. The message continued. "I want to be very honest with you, because I believe honesty is faster than the alternative, and I have found over 11 years that the alternative wastes a great deal of time." Admiral Varus's voice was not angry. It was not triumphant. It was the voice of someone reading a prepared statement that they have rehearsed not for performance but for precision. "You have 60,000 ships in a formation that is currently experiencing repositioning difficulties. We have nearly 5,000 ships at approach position, and an additional 400 positioned at your logistical infrastructure. In standard naval engagement terms, this is what my people call a checkmate." She let that word sit. Checkmate. A human word. From a human game. A game about pieces on a board, where the goal is not to destroy your opponent's pieces but to make it impossible for their most important piece to move without being taken. A game. I had noted in report number 12 that humans play from childhood, that they teach their children, that they had apparently been playing in one form or another for roughly 1,500 years. Suddenly the game felt very relevant. "I am not transmitting this message to threaten," Admiral Varus said. "The threat is already established by geometry. I am transmitting it to offer you a choice, specifically, the choice that you did not offer us 11 years ago." The calm in her voice had acquired something beneath it. Not anger. Something older and quieter than anger, something that had been carried for a very long time. "You came to our worlds and you told us to submit or be destroyed. You did not ask. You did not negotiate. You presented us with a mathematical fact and expected us to accept it." A pause. We did not accept it. In the grand deliberation chamber, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The screens showed the blockade formation, still struggling with its repositioning problem. They showed the human fleet patient and still. They showed the relay station sectors, dark and offline. They showed the single ship sitting alone in the center of 60,000 warships, completely unafraid. "So here is your mathematical fact," Admiral Varus said. "You can fight us. You will take losses you have not budgeted for, against weapon systems you have not encountered before, in a formation configuration that is currently working against you. You may win. I will not pretend to certainty I do not have. War is not mathematics, as you perhaps failed to account for when you started this one. A brief pause that felt like the space between heartbeats. Or you can open diplomatic communication on this frequency in the next 30 minutes, and we can begin the conversation that should have happened 11 years ago, before you decided that humanity was a problem to be solved rather than a species to be reckoned with. Silence. 30 minutes, Admiral Varys said. Then we move. The transmission ended. The chamber stayed still for a very long time. Longer than 4 minutes this time. It was Councillor Fal-Durez who moved first, the very old Tethian councillor who had made that very small laugh earlier and covered it with a cough, who had seen centuries of galactic politics unfold with the slow patience of someone who knows that empires are longer than lifetimes. He walked to the main communication terminal with the unhurried step of a being who has reached an age where hurrying strikes him as slightly undignified. He keyed in the open emergency frequency. He adjusted the transmission settings. Then he looked back at the chamber, at Dara Sovex, standing rigid with professional composure, at Brim Tavar, sitting with his tactical screens and his expression of complicated reckoning, at the junior counselors and the analysts and the aides who had come to watch a celebration and were now watching something considerably more significant. I am going to do something, Councillor Durez said pleasantly, that I strongly suspect several of my colleagues will object to. He turned back to the terminal. This is Councillor Fal-Durez of the Tethian Assembly, responding on behalf of the Galactic Convergence Council. Admiral Varys. He paused, the pause of someone who is choosing their first words with full awareness that they will be recorded and remembered. We accept your invitation to open diplomatic communication. I would suggest, given the present circumstances, that we skip the usual procedural formalities and begin with something more direct. Another pause. We are listening. He released the transmission key. He looked at the countdown on the main screen. 22 minutes remaining. Someone, he said conversationally to no one in particular, should probably fetch Councillor Tanu back from wherever he ran to. This is going to involve a great deal of paperwork. I sat in the observation gallery and I watched the next 6 hours unfold in the way that history tends to unfold, awkwardly, with several people talking over each other, at least one undignified argument about procedural authority, and a great deal of transmission delay while signals crossed the distance between the council chamber and Admiral Varys' ship. The human fleet stayed in position, patient, unhurried. The relay stations in sectors 7 through 14 came back online 2 hours into the negotiations, a gesture that the Admiral made without being asked and without comment, and which Councillor Durez received with a small nod that contained more diplomatic weight than anything said aloud in the previous hour. I wrote notes the entire time. Not a report, not yet, something more personal, the kind of notes you write when you are watching something that you know will be the most significant event of your career and possibly of your century, and you want to remember it accurately rather than as it will eventually be retold. Priva sat beside me and read over my shoulder, and occasionally corrected my spelling. You were right, she said at some point. I am not certain exactly when because I had stopped watching the clock by then. I know, I said. You do not have to be gracious about it. I am not being gracious, I am being honest. I know I was right. I knew I was right for 8 weeks, and it was genuinely unpleasant, knowing something nobody would listen to. She was quiet for a moment. I should have read your reports. Yes, I said. You should have. I am sorry. I know, I said again. It is all right. I looked at the screen, where Admiral Varys' voice was calmly dismantling 11 years of convergence policy with the methodical precision of someone who had prepared for exactly this conversation. It turned out all right. The preliminary peace accord was signed 41 days after that morning in the Grand Deliberation Chamber. 41 days of negotiation, argument, redrafting, walkouts, return sessions, and at least 3 occasions when Admiral Varys went very quiet in a way that made everyone on the council side of the communication link sit slightly straighter. Humanity got the colony worlds back. All 4 of them. The Convergence Council provided reconstruction support, a provision that Councillor Fal-Durez proposed, and that several of his colleagues argued against until Admiral Varys mentioned, very calmly, that the Terran reclamation fleet was still sitting in position and had not yet needed to be resupplied, because the manufacturing platforms had been thoughtful enough to include extensive provisions. After that, the reconstruction support provision passed quickly. The Terran reclamation fleet remained in position throughout the 41 days. They never moved. They never threatened. They never fired a single shot. They simply existed, out there beyond the blockade line, in numbers that everyone in every negotiating session was always aware of, the way you are always aware of a very large and very quiet thing standing in the room, even when you are pretending to focus on other things. When the accord was signed, the fleet turned and went home. No victory parade, no ceremonial displays. They just turned in that same unhurried formation, and headed for Earth. I watched them go on the monitoring network's long-range sensors, 5,000 ships diminishing slowly to points of light, and then to signals, and then to silence. My final report on the subject was 43 pages long. I gave it a simple title. They were not hiding. My supervisor read it. He called me into his office afterward, and sat across the desk from me for a long moment, in silence, with the particular expression of someone who is working through something complicated. Then he said, "How many ships did you estimate in report number 38? 4,600 to 5,200. I said. The actual number was 4,847. Yes, another silence. Cale, he said, I owe you an apology. You do, I said. You also owe me 47 reports worth of your attention, but I will accept the apology as a starting point. He looked at me. Then he did something I had not expected. He laughed, not a polite laugh, a real one. The laugh of someone who has been carrying an absurd amount of tension and has just found the exact release valve. The new Human Monitoring Division brief, he said, when he had recovered. I want you to lead it. Full team, expanded mandate, actual budget. He paused. Also, effective immediately, all reports from your division go directly to the High Commander's desk. No filtering. That would have been useful 8 weeks ago. I said, yes, he said. It would have. I have thought, many times since that morning in the Grand Deliberation Chamber about what humanity did, about the scale of it, about the patience of it. 36 months. 3 years of watching their worlds fall, their people die, their fleet shrink, their resources drain. 3 years of looking. To every sensor and analyst and intelligence report in the convergence, like a species in its final decline, like a problem solving itself, and the whole time in the dark beyond Jupiter, beyond Neptune, in the cold and silent reaches of the outer system where we were not looking because we were too busy counting their losses, they were building 2 manufacturing platforms, running at full capacity, 200,000 engineers and workers, living in the dark, in secrecy, for 3 years, building ships that our databases had never seen, designing weapons around the weaknesses they had spent 11 years cataloging in us, running tactical simulations of a blockade they knew was coming, because they had planned for it, because they were 11 steps ahead while we were congratulating ourselves for being 2 ahead. 26 ships, sitting silent near Jupiter, watching, feeding data home on frequencies so narrow we never caught them, watching 60,000 ships form a perfect blockade and noting, with presumably great professional interest, exactly which direction would cause those 60,000 ships the most organizational complexity, if someone were to approach from it. 31 billion dead, 4 colony worlds taken. Everything that could be lost was lost, and humanity looked at that loss and said, quietly, to themselves and nobody else, not yet. They did not break. They never break. I wrote that at the bottom of my final report, as a note to whoever in the High Commander's office would read it next. Observation, for the record. Humanity does not break. Adjust all future assessments accordingly. And for the love of everything in this galaxy, read the reports. My supervisor apparently read that part. He sent me back a note with 2 words, noted, completely. And somewhere, on a blue-green planet orbiting a medium-sized star, 9 billion humans who had spent 3 years holding the line while 5,000 ships were built in the dark were going home to 4 worlds that were theirs again. I suspect if you asked any of them they would say it was worth it. I suspect if you had told them 11 years ago that this was where they would end up, they would have nodded and rolled up their sleeves and said something extremely short and extremely determined, and then they would have gotten to work.
Did you realize humanity had been playing them the whole time? Let me know in the comments, like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.